The Pittsburgh Steelers are going into training camp with a lot of optimism. They gave Kenny Pickett a more improved offensive line. This is an offensive line that people are nicknaming the Pickett Fence. And one of the biggest storylines for the Steelers heading into training camp this year is at left tackle. Because the Steelers traded up to draft Broderick Jones, right? And Broderick Jones is really athletically gifted. I mean, this dude in the open field is a monster. This dude is super fast. He's super strong. This dude is like the Incredible Hulk playing football. And the Pittsburgh Steelers drafted him with the expectations of him becoming their franchise left tackle. But the Steelers are the kind of organization that just because you're a first round pick, that doesn't mean you're automatically going to start. So Broderick Jones is going into training camp having to prove himself, being able to win the starting left tackle job from Dan Moore. And I'm going to just be honest with you, right? If Broderick Jones cannot beat out Dan Moore throughout training camp this year, I'm going to be really, really worried. And you may say, man, JT, he's a rookie. This man is a developmental project, man. Like, he may not be able to start day one. I do understand that. But you also got to understand the guy who he's going to be competing for the left tackle job with. Dan Moore was one of the worst left tackles in the NFL last year. So I don't feel like the bar is too high for Broderick Jones to have to be able to climb. And I don't think that Broderick Jones can be any worse than what Dan Moore was at left tackle. Now, maybe Dan Moore ends up improving throughout training camp, and we would definitely like that. But I'm expecting Broderick Jones to end up winning the starting left tackle job for the Steelers. And for the people who keep saying he's a developmental project, like, a lot of the issues that people have on Broderick Jones, I think can be fixed with coaching, which is something that Mike Tomlin loves to do. And Mike Tomlin, if you hear him in any interview, he always says that if you're a coach who's scared to take a flyer on the player because you feel like there's some issues that needs to be coached up, then you're not a good coach, because as a coach, your job is to coach, it's to be a teacher, it's to help players get better. You shouldn't expect a player just to come out just because he was a first round pick to be a polished product. Like, everybody needs a little bit of work. I feel like Broderick Jones is going to be a lot better than what many people are expecting him to be. I think he can be better than Paris Johnson, who was most people's #1 offensive tackle coming out of this past year's draft. I love his athleticism. If you're a linebacker or a defensive back, if this dude gets his hands on you, you are going down to the damn ground. This dude is going to bulldoze you like he's a freight train. So I think that Broderick Jones is going to end up winning the starting left tackle job from Dan Moore. Now, if Dan Moore ends up winning it, I would be fairly surprised, and I would be really worried about Broderick Jones. But I feel like Broderick Jones is going to be able to win this starting left tackle job. And there was a lot of praise about Broderick Jones and how he performed throughout minicamp for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Cam Hayward gave him some praise as well. So going to be eager to see how he does in training camp. Another position battle for the Pittsburgh Steelers that we got to talk about is who's going to be the starting strong safety, DeMonte Casey or Keanu Neal. Now, I'm a big fan of Keanu Neal. Maybe I'm still living in a little bit of nostalgia from his Pro Bowl season with the Atlanta Falcons, but you look at what he brings to the table. This isn't just somebody who can play safety. He can play in the slot. He can play linebacker a little bit. So I feel like even if he doesn't end up winning the starting job over DeMonte Casey, I at least feel like the Steelers and Mike Tomlin are going to have some special packages for him. Like, he can be like a nickel or dime linebacker in certain packages. You can also move him near the line of scrimmage and have him play coverage against tight ends and running backs that are coming out of the backfield. So I do feel like even if he doesn't end up winning the starting safety job, there is a pretty good role for Keanu Neal to have. Now, some people are going to be like, JT, don't forget about Trey Norwood. Like, Trey Norwood, I think he isn't really cut out for safety, really. I probably like him a little bit more in the slot than I do at safety. DeMonte Casey probably is going to be the favorite to win the job in most Steelers fans' eyes. He was really productive when he was on the field last year when Terrell Edmunds was off the field, and I felt like he was better than Terrell Edmunds last season, and I was even pushing for him to be the full-time starter over Terrell Edmunds. So when the Steelers didn't bring back Terrell Edmunds, you don't know how happy I was. And Terrell Edmunds is not a bad safety. This dude is definitely really solid. It's just that he never played up to the level of expectations that you expect from a safety that gets drafted in the first round. You take a safety in the first round, you're expecting Derwin James, fam. You're expecting to be one of the best safeties in the game if you get drafted in the first round as a safety. And if you don't end up being an elite safety and you're just a serviceable or good safety like what Terrell Edmunds was, you're going to be considered a little bit of a letdown. So you get DeMonte Casey, who was very good in the limited role that he had last season. He had 2 interceptions, and he had a pretty big impact every time he was on the field for Pittsburgh, and not really playing a lot of the snaps due to Terrell Edmunds being ahead of him. I think he probably should be the favorite to win this strong safety job over Keanu O'Neal, which I am rooting for Keanu O'Neal, but I just think that DeMonte Casey is better than him. Now, I know that his age may scare people off. You would like somebody who's young, enter their 20s, to get that starting safety job for you. But I think that DeMonte Casey is a pretty savvy veteran. He's been around the league for a while. So I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers would be a really good home for him. And you got to remember that if he can play the way that he did last season, with him not really having as many opportunities as a guy that starts, imagine what he can do playing 100% of the snaps on defense. So I'm really excited about DeMonte Casey and what he can bring to the table as the starting safety for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and hopefully he can be better than Terrell Edmunds. And Terrell Edmunds wasn't bad, but he wasn't great, and I think that DeMonte Casey probably could end up being really good for Pittsburgh instead of really solid, which is what Terrell Edmunds was. Now, the players that I'm going to be watching throughout training camp for Pittsburgh this year is going to be rookie cornerback Joey Porter. If the Steelers are going to have a good season this year, I think Joey Porter is going to be a big reason for it. This, in my opinion, was arguably the best cornerback coming out of this past year's draft class. He's a very aggressive man-to-man press coverage corner. He wants to get in your face, and he wants to beat you up. And you look at Pittsburgh, you already have Levi Wallace on the opposite side. Now, who's going to end up being cornerback 1, Joey Porter or Levi Wallace? I probably still would go with Levi Wallace just because I don't know if the Steelers are going to throw Joey Porter to the Wolves that early, but I wouldn't be surprised if he does end up becoming cornerback 1. He does have the upside, he does have the potential, he does have the youth, and he does have the athleticism to win that starting cornerback 1 job over Levi Wallace. But even if he's cornerback 2, he's still going to have a pretty big impact on the Steelers defense. And going into training camp, you're going to be matched up against George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Allen Robinson. So there's going to be plenty of challenges for Joey Porter to have to overcome to prove himself, to show that, hey, I can come in and be the number 1 guy right away. You don't have to make me a second guy behind Levi Wallace. And Levi Wallace was pretty solid last year. So if Joey Porter can end up dethroning Levi Wallace from being that first cornerback on this depth chart and dethrone him to that number 2 spot and he takes over, that would give me huge amounts of confidence in Joey Porter going into this season. I think that Joey Porter is more than capable of being able to do that. This was somebody who I thought would have been a top 15 pick, and he ended up being available come the Steelers' first pick of the 2nd round. And his dad also played for Pittsburgh well. So normally when you got somebody's son who ends up getting drafted by the team that his pops played for, most of the times they end up being pretty productive. So I'm keeping my eyes on Joey Porter. Keanu Bitten, defensive tackle, rookie out of Wisconsin, was also drafted in the 2nd round. And a lot of people really, really love this pick. And when you look at Keanu Bitten play, this is somebody who is really quick, really explosive. I mean, you watch this man play, you kind of get a little bit scared that he's a defensive tackle. You like, damn, this dude's a defensive tackle moving like this. This is scary. This is scary. Now, he's not one of those Jordan Davises or Jalen Carters, but I think he's a tier beneath what those guys were as prospects. And I think that right away, with him being the starter on the interior defensive line of Pittsburgh next to Larry Ogunjobi, he immediately is going to help boost this Pittsburgh Steelers run defense, because that's something that he was really phenomenal at doing at Wisconsin. Now, he didn't get pushed around too often. I do want to see him develop more when it comes to what he's going to bring as a pass rusher. But I really think that this is somebody who's going to come in and have a really big impact as a rookie. So the two rookies that I'm the most highest on for Pittsburgh this year are Joey Porter Jr. and Keanu Benton out of Wisconsin. A lot of people really love Keanu Benton. Now, let's go to the offensive side of the football, right? What are some players that Steelers fans need to look out for on offense during training camp? For me, it's going to be wide receiver Hakeem Butler. Now, Hakeem Butler, some of y'all might remember that name. You were like, JT, wasn't this the dude who was getting all this hype in the 2019 NFL draft out of Iowa State? Yes, it is. And you wonder why you haven't heard from Hakeem Butler ever since? Well, he's bounced around the league a little bit. He also played in the XFL this past season, and he was pretty good. And I was watching a good amount of the XFL, and Hakeem Butler was just a man amongst boys in the XFL. This dude was a fantastic deep threat down the field. Every time Agent McCarron threw the ball up to Hakeem Butler downfield, he went up and got it. And you look at the fact that you don't really have concerns with your fourth and fifth wide receivers, but this is somebody who definitely could end up, dethroning a Miles Boykin or end up being the fourth wide receiver on this depth chart. Because one thing that the Steelers love are really big body wide receivers that you can tell them just go downfield and we're going to throw it up to you. And you look at Hakeem Butler, I think that him and Pittsburgh could end up being a really good fit. Now, I do want to see what he does as a run blocker, because that's also going to be a plus. That's something that Miles Boykin is really good at. And you look at his size, he's 6'5", 227 pounds. So imagine how much of a threat he can be as your fourth option behind A-Rob, Deontay, and George Pickens. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what Hakeem Butler does throughout training camp for Pittsburgh, because during his time in the XFL, this dude was a deep ball 50-50 machine. He kind of reminded me a little bit of Mike Williams, and I do think that Hakeem Butler is a better player now than what he was when he was first coming into the league and he was playing for the Arizona Cardinals. I'm really looking forward to seeing how he performs in training camp, and I'm really expecting Hakeem Butler to make this roster. It may be a little bit crazy. I know some people may be like, man, JT, he's not somebody who's going to stick. He's going to be a practice squad guy at best. I really think Hakeem Butler can carve out a role on this Steelers offense. You can always use a wide receiver that's a big body guy that you just say, F it, he's down there somewhere, just throw it up to him. He also could be a really good red zone weapon. So I'm just rooting for Hakeem Butler. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because I'm always a fan of players who come from leagues like the USFL and the XFL. And the last guy I'm going to be keeping my eyes on is Jaylen Warren. Jaylen Warren, I told you guys around this time last year when I did my Pittsburgh Steelers training camp preview in 2022 to look out for Jaylen Warren. Now, Jaylen Warren, I watched a lot of him during his time at Oklahoma State, and I was telling you guys that he was going to be somebody who was going to take that RB2 job by the throat. And what did I tell you? He was really good last season. And some people say that he's good enough to be an RB1 on a good amount of teams. And when you look at the skill set that Jaylen Warren brings, I think he's more explosive and more shiftier than Najee Harris. I think that Najee Harris is the better overall back, but you're looking at a good running back to be able to give Najee Harris a breather at times. Jaylen Warren definitely is that guy, and I want to see what he does going into year two. How better is he going to be? Because last season he was pretty good, but if he ends up taking another big step in development this year, maybe him and Najee Harris actually end up legitimately splitting playing time this year. Maybe Najee Harris gets about 50% of the carries and Jaylen Warren gets 50% of the carries, because I think that Jaylen Warren is a really good running back. Now, that probably won't turn out how I want it to. Jaylen Warren probably may at best get 25-30% of the carries, but I think that Najee Harris probably is going to be the workhorse back. But Pittsburgh has put a lot of emphasis on making sure that they can stretch out Najee Harris' career as long as possible, and a lot of Steelers fans don't want Najee Harris getting overworked real early, like how the Steelers did with Le'Veon Bell, running him into the dirt really early in his career. So Jaylen Warren, looking forward to seeing what he does throughout training camp for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this is my training camp preview for the Steelers. Let me know if there are some things that you're going to be looking out for, some position battles that I may have not talked about on this.